To me, travel is about exploring, and I have to feel like I am exploring and discovering things. And this was one of these times. Every time I put on my boots and I got out there and started walking, that's what it was like.
Way back in episode 10 on the 15 benefits of adventure travel, I neglected to add one to it that I want to add to it today, and that is adventure travel often helps with the problem with over-tourism. So what's over-tourism? As the world continues to grow in population, particularly the blossoming middle class in China and other Asian countries, the cheaper airfares, and frankly Instagram showing off great destinations, travel has become huge and is growing at an enormous pace, often at a pace that the local townships can't absorb all of the people that are going to these top destinations. The residents have been in an uproar in places like Venice and Barcelona because the towns just can't handle the crowds. The places like Airbnb are pushing out the local residents. They can no longer afford to live in their own town anymore because the tourists will pay more than they can afford to pay in the rent. And so one thing I think that adventure travel is doing that is good is that we're often going to off the beaten path places. And even when we go to one of the top destinations like Machu Picchu on the Inca Trail, they've already recognized this in the natural resource environment of the travel industry, and they limit the permits to 200 a day. Same thing if you want to go track gorillas. They limit that too. They limit by the gorilla families and the number of people. And so these tourist control efforts create a better experience for those that do go, and it helps keep the fragile environments from becoming trampled upon and degraded. Today's guest is going to tell us about a stunningly beautiful pilgrimage trail that hardly anybody knows about. Longtime listeners may recall that back in episode 6, we covered the El Camino in Spain, which is one of the most popular pilgrimage routes in the world. For those of you unfamiliar with the El Camino, it's a series of pilgrimage paths, of which there are many in Europe, the most popular of which is in France, and they all lead to the Shrine of St. James in Santiago de Compostela. It's a wonderful adventure. I encourage you to do it. I encourage you to listen back to, that was episode number 6. I encourage you to listen to that and do it. But I would encourage you to do it in the off season, in the shoulder season. Then you'd be more welcomed. It won't be so crowded. The weather will be better as well. And I think you'd have a more enjoyable time, and it helps spread the quote-unquote wealth of the masses of tourists over some of these destinations. But if you want to go in the summertime and have that same kind of a feeling of a pilgrimage walk, of a meditative walk, it doesn't have to necessarily be religious-based, although often it is. Often these pilgrimage trails are just to kind of get to know yourself better, understand yourself better, maybe work through some problems, as well as doing it for penance reasons, asking for blessings, and all the traditional reasons that people do the Camino in Spain. Today, we're going to Norway, where another saint has been revered, and there have been pilgrimage trails since the Middle Ages. But unlike the Spanish El Camino, which gets over 200,000 pilgrims a year, this gets around 1,000. And that's spread out over 7 paths. Even though the most popular one gets 70% of the pilgrim traffic, you're still only talking about 700 people over the course of a year. So it's ridiculously underpopulated and gives you a wonderful experience to be out in the Norwegian countryside and checking out the villages. One of them's even around the fjords. And it's just a marvelous, marvelous adventure that we've got covered for you today. At the back end, I'll tell you a little bit more details about the nitty-gritty. And of course, you can always go to the website, activetravelaadventures.com/Norway or /40. You'll see the photos, get more detailed information. You can download the free travel planner, etc. So let's get on with today's interview about St. Olav's Way in Norway. Can we start by introducing yourself and perhaps telling us your age?
I'm Sherry Ott, and I'm 48 years old, nearly 49. I recently located to Denver, Colorado. Prior to that, I had actually been nomadic for, 11 years without a home. And I finally decided it was time to settle down into a home base again. And I use Denver as my home base. It offers a lot of great outdoor adventures. And then I travel from here. about 50% of the time, I would say.
And one of the things I like and that I follow you is you're very big on adventure travel, which is the focus of this program. So you're hiking. Tell us a little bit how you got into adventure travel to start with.
Well, as I said, I started when I was 36. And at that time, I was a runner. I was running marathons. I was a very driven person. And, I used to do all this adventure stuff really kind of for the pure adrenaline of it and the challenge. However, as I said, I've gotten much older now. So I've come to really realize that the best thing you can do is keep moving just as you get older. And I also see that in my parents. They're both still alive at 82 and quite active. So, I realized that it's also important to keep moving. And the cool thing is that adventure travel allows you to do that, but also see all kinds of new places. So it's kind of allows you to combine, these two things that I love. I would say also it's a huge source of accomplishment and self-confidence. I think anyone who has completed something that they questioned whether they could do, whether that's a hike or a bike or, even maybe a hot air balloon ride because people are scared of heights, you finish that. And once you're done with it, that sense of accomplishment and confidence that comes with it, man, you can't beat it. It is a high like no other. And I think we all need that. We all need those wins. And I think there's so many different reasons. It's also really, my therapy in a way. I love long distance hiking and hiking because it gives me a chance to think. And I think that's really important to slow down and just be able to process things. So for all those reasons, I love adventure travel. And I think on top of it, I love trying new things. So new types of adventures and stuff like that are really important to me. It's one of the reasons why I've traveled for so long. I think I'm kind of addicted to the new in the world. So having new experiences every day. And that's what's really kept me on the road and kept me doing all these things.
And speaking of new, you introduced me to what we're going to be talking about today, St. Olav's Way in Norway, which I wasn't familiar with at all. Of course, I've heard of Norway and the fjords and all that, but you did an adventure there that is really kind of unique. So few people are actually doing it. Can you tell us kind of give us a brief overview about what we're going to be talking about today?
Yeah, and I was really excited to learn about this trail. So St. Olav's Way is actually a long distance pilgrimage, similar to that of the Camino de Santiago, which I'm sure many people have heard of. But quite opposite, no one's heard of St. Olav's Way because it is relatively new. And the reason why I even learned about it is because I was invited on a press trip, actually, because I do blogging for a living. I was invited on a press trip from Visit Norway to come and walk parts of the trail because they're, of course, looking for some more publicity. But as soon as I heard about it, I actually changed all of my travel plans to make sure this could happen. Actually, overall, there are actually 7 different pilgrimage routes. They start in various places, but they all end in Trondheim, Norway, what they used to call Nidaros at the cathedral there. And kind of in the same vein as the Camino de Santiago and other pilgrimages, there is a Christianity element to this. At the cathedral in Trondheim, it is said that their revered saint, Saint Olav, kind of a Scandinavian saint, is buried there. Yet, quite frankly, it hasn't been proven. But he's there. And so from ancient times, people have made this pilgrimage from different parts of Scandinavia to Trondheim to this Nidaros cathedral to once again kind of be relieved of their sins or ailments or whatever. So kind of the standard pilgrimage story in a way, but this is in a place where very few people know about.
Right. And you don't have to necessarily do this in a pilgrimage mental way. You can do this for all sorts of different ways. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, yeah. Well, and I'll back up for a second because I actually completed the Camino de Santiago in 2012, and I did do that whole thing. And that's when I kind of learned about pilgrimages in general. I am not necessarily a religious person at all, but I find the whole thing really fascinating. So the same thing here in St. Olav's Way. You can walk it for religious reasons, definitely. There are many beautiful churches and stops along the way. You can have that whole kind of spiritual experience, or you can just walk it. And as you said, you don't have to walk the entire thing at once. This is the most frequented path is the Gudsbrandalen path, which is the path that I did portions of. And that's a 4-week, nearly 400-mile path. So not everyone has to do that. You can easily do, day hikes. You can do 3 or 4 days. You can do a week, and you can, split it up into a number of different trips and do the whole thing eventually. But, I walked it mainly for that adventurous, challenge, as well as, this idea of, taking time off to kind of meditate and think while I walk. So people have all kinds of different reasons why they walk. I will say most of the people I met on this trail, which you will not meet many because it's new, were walking it because they were just avid hikers. I don't know that it was a huge religious element for them, but it's fun to be involved in something like that and to kind of follow that ancient path.
So I guess you tailor your trip to what you want to get out of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so you can make it a spiritual quest if you'd like, or you can make it a mental health quest if you just need to work out some issues in your own mind and have some peace and quiet, a chance to think. Or I like the way you put it in your blog as considering it a wellness trip or the ultimate adventure for health and fitness. Plus, the fact that there's not going to be many other people out there, particularly Americans, kind of gives it a little extra twist as well.
Yeah, it's kind of there's really not that many people on it at all. So, if you like solo hiking or you like to, not have crowded trails, this is the place for you. You will run into people in the evenings, obviously, at the different pilgrimages where people stay. But, I think on the week I was on the path, I maybe ran into, a couple of hikers a day, but it's really not well known. And for that, yes, it makes it really a great kind of wellness path, a meditative type walk. You can really get away from things.
If you are going solo, you should realize that you will be solo for the most part. Unlike some of the more sociable hikes, like the El Camino, there's 300,000 people a year doing the El Camino versus, I think you said 1,000 for this one.
Yes, the stats they had on it when I was there in the middle of summer was 1,000 people in 2017 finished it. So those are 1,000 people that actually checked in at the end, got their credentials. You have to walk 100 kilometers to get your credentials or, to get your kind of certificate. So there could also be, other people, and I'm sure there's probably at least 1,000 or more that are doing like short little day hikes on the trails because they're really well marked and groomed. So, there could be much more than that, but 1,000 who actually finished the entire pilgrimage in 2017.
Very cool. I love the idea that you can be by yourself. And so at the end of each day, you're ending up either in a lodge or a town. The lodging is a little bit different there too because the infrastructure is not in place. Can you talk a little bit about like the kinds of places that you stay?
Yeah, it is very different than the Camino. So if you've done the Camino and you're looking for, something exactly like that, this isn't going to be, but it's really close. The beautiful thing about this is, and I think I'd even said once that this is like the Camino 20 years ago, or probably even more than that. This is the beginnings of a pilgrimage trail that's gaining in popularity. So that means that along with creating this trail, the tourism, Norway basically also had to encourage people to have lodgings and stuff like that to support the trail. So that's still kind of all getting in place, which is why I say one big difference than the Camino is, on the Camino, you can kind of just get up and walk and, wherever you stop, you stop. You don't need reservations. You don't need a plan. On the St. Olav's Way, you do need a plan. You do need to actually plan ahead and know where you're going to be staying because the places to stay can be sometimes few and far between. So it's not like the Camino where you just keep on walking for another hour and there's another place. So that's important to note. But yes, the lodging at the end of the night, it can range, of course, into anything. But, if you've planned it out, of course, there's nice hotels. I stayed at a couple of those. There's just your standard hotels, maybe if you end in a village. But the stuff that I really loved about it was there are a whole bunch of farmhouses and old farms that house pilgrims. And the neat thing is these were just farmers. They farm still regularly, lots of them. And this was just a side thing. Once the path came through their property, they decided, oh, hey, we can put up some pilgrims. So they either, used one of their existing buildings or redid some stuff. But, it was a secondary thing. It's not their main business. So that makes it even more personal, if you ask me. So, yeah, you can stay in some really beautiful, ancient kind of farmhouses, very intimate, and really get to meet the locals. Also, as another alternative, along the paths, and especially the Gudsbrandalen path, which is the most popular, there are 6, I think they call them pilgrim centers along that path. And one is at the end, obviously at the cathedral, but the other ones are kind of placed out. And those pilgrim centers offer places to stay. You do need to, let them know ahead of time that you're arriving. But they also offer a whole bunch of resources on the hike. And it's just that was also really, I guess, different than the Camino. I loved that. I loved that they had these centers where you could really kind of regroup and plan and meet other people. And, it was just there for the pilgrims. So, yeah, so there's all of those options for lodging. Then there's also camping. You can camp anywhere in Norway. I think you have to be within 500 feet of a building or something you have to be 500 feet away from the building. But you can easily also carry your tent and just pitch a tent wherever you want in Norway. And I did certainly see people doing that along the path. So you could do that for a couple of days and then maybe stay in a farmhouse or in a nicer hotel or whatever you like. So there's a lot of options, but it does need to be planned ahead of time and reserved ahead of time.
Another important difference, too, is there's no luggage transfer service at the time of this recording, so you do need to be prepared to take all of your stuff with you at all times.
Yes, they are trying to put that in place. Like I said, they created these trails, or they kind of launched them, I think, in the late 90s. And so they've been building everything up, the signage, the infrastructure, and luggage is certainly on their list, I learned, but it is not there yet.
That's definitely something to keep in mind, because I'm going to guess at this point you might be carrying around 30 pounds.
Yeah, a little bit more than you would the Camino, because one, I think you have a lot more different kinds of weather to contend with. You also probably have more food that you may be carrying, because lots of times it's further distances between the towns and where you can get food. Plus, at all of these, like the farmhouses and stuff like that, yes, some of them do offer dinners, but it's not as prevalent as the pilgrims' dinners and for the Camino. Sometimes they all do offer access to a kitchen. So lots of people have to carry a few days worth of food, and then, they kind of cook their own meals or something in a kitchen. So yeah, I would say 30 pounds is probably a good estimate.
To compare that, you're probably carrying 10 to 20 pounds on a day hike with luggage transfer.
Oh, yeah.
Because there's 7 different paths, you can't generalize, you need to carry your water or you don't. So each night you need to check with your lodging to see how much water you need to take to your next water station, whether it's a stream that you need to purify or not, if it's as pure as Iceland, or a village where you can pick up some water. Your water situation is a delicate balancing act. Water's heavy. It weighs 8 pounds per gallon. So you want to try to gauge so that you bring enough water that you don't get dehydrated, but you don't want to be getting to the next way station where you can get the water and have a half a gallon still left in your tank. I also recommend taking one of those water bladders like the platypus. These have a little mouthpiece tube that hooks onto the shoulder side of your backpack so that you can get water constantly as often as you want it without having to stop and reach into your pack to get a water bottle. It makes it super easy to stay hydrated, and you're more likely to do so because you don't have to go through any effort. So check with the locals or at the pilgrim centers, and they'll be able to guide you. This sounds like a lot harder than the El Camino, and you're carrying more weight. So what are we looking at? In addition to having the mindfulness and the wellness and the pilgrimage, what's the landscape look like? Is it pretty?
Oh, yeah. It's very different. It is more difficult. The trail itself is more difficult than the Camino, I would say. It's just more what I would call proper hiking. And Norway is full of hills. However, the highest point you get to, I think, is just a little bit over 4,000 feet, which really isn't that crazy. And I say that only because I'm coming to you from Colorado, probably. But it's not, even that point is not like a super steep, like scramble or anything like that. In fact, it's a really gradual up, and you're kind of exposed up above. There's no trees and stuff like that. But it really ranges from, typical rolling farmland, with where you're walking even on like farm roads, gravel roads and stuff like that, really pleasant, to there was a day we spent a whole day kind of walking in a river kind of canyon or valley, and we were kind of up on the side. So it was beautiful views, and there were all these farmhouses and stuff kind of built on the inclines. And then you look down onto the river. Everything is always very lush and green. And then the day we went over the big pass there, that was also a lot of farmhand, a lot of gradual up. In fact, that day we actually even ran into, started out so hot. I remember that. And then we ran into rain, and then it actually even hailed at the top. So, you get a little bit of everything, and you do have to be prepared for that. which also makes the trail a little bit more muddy and stuff like that. But it's just what I would call proper hiking. Like you would want hiking boots to do this.
How about hiking sticks?
Yes, definitely sticks. I don't go anywhere without my hiking sticks.
I don't go anywhere without sticks either. But for those that don't use sticks, would you still recommend sticks?
You know what? If they just don't use them at all, no, you probably don't need them. I mean, like I said, it's not like a scramble. It's nothing super steep or big, tight inclines or ledges or anything like that. So no, you could probably get away with it if you don't like to use them.
And we're pretty far north then. So this is a summer activity.
Yes, definitely. I think the hiking, they say the best hiking is normally between May and August. You could push it June to September, but you really couldn't do it much beyond that. I was there at mid-July. And like I said, we had hail up at, 4,000 feet. It was also really warm when we were there, which was unusual. I was expecting it to be cooler. But the other thing you have to know is that you're going to also lose daylight really fast. If you start June or if you're hiking in September, you have fewer hours, of daylight. And you need to take that into account because the other thing is, like I said, you need to plan ahead. And on average to get this if you're going to do the whole thing and you're going to do the whole 400 miles on the Kungsleden path, then you're going to have to average a solid 15 to 17 or so miles a day. And like I said, this is a little bit more challenging hiking than the Camino. So there's some good exertion there. And you need all that time, daylight time, to get through those 15 to 17 miles sometimes.
And how is the navigation there? Is it well signed?
Yes, that is one thing that I think is just really cool. Like I said, they created this really. Well, the paths were there, but they really, they made them so that it was something people from anywhere could come and do back in the late 90s. So the signage is really quite good along the route that I was on. Now, they're also always building new paths. They just opened up a new one that comes from the fjords. So that one's probably even more, a little bit more challenging because I can imagine that you're going to have more hills. Comes from the fjords and then drops into Trondheim. And that one's probably the newest, so I don't know what the signage is on that. But the one that we was on was really, really quite well done.
On their website, and I will put links to the website in the show notes and in the travel planner, that they're still in the works on how to plan that online. So that must be that Valdez Pass, the number 7?
Yes, it is. Exactly. It just opened it this last year.
That hooks up at the end to the path that you were on. So they all roads lead to it, but a couple of them hook up to, I'm going to mangle this with the Gunsbrad. Say that name again.
Kungsleden.
2 of the trails, the number 6 and number 7, hook up with the Gunsbrad, that path.
Yes, it does.
They're used to me mangling things in this thing. And then what about if you can't speak anything but English and you don't speak a word of Norwegian? How are you going to fare there?
Oh, it'll be a breeze. No worries there. If you've ever been to Norway before or any of Scandinavia, you know that they all speak really great English. So never was that even a remote issue for me. Everyone was really great. And also I think, the other thing to know is that because this is relatively new, and keep in mind, Norway is has a huge tourism industry. They have millions of people coming to visit a year. But when you think of Norway, people go to the fjords. And yes, there's brilliant hiking out by the fjords and, it's beautiful. But not many people come into the middle of the country, this really rural part of the country. The heart is what I would call it. And so when you are walking through there and there's so few people, the people who are hosting pilgrims and the little restaurants and stuff like that are along the path, they're super eager to talk to you. They love it. It brought tourism to them. And I think that's another really important thing when we talk about, lately there's been a lot of stuff around over tourism, and I'm very sensitive to that. And I always like to try to get people to go to new places. So that's another reason why I just love this path.
Yeah, I like to, because like you say, in the heavily tourist areas, the locals can tend to get jaded by you. And it doesn't sound like they're like that at all here. So not only are they getting the money, it's probably fun for them to meet people from around the world because it's still a new thing.
Yeah. And like I said, a lot of these places, especially, where you're staying at night, these are farmers and farmhouses and, it's simplicity. And yeah, they don't have that many tourists coming through. So it's fun. And they, like I said, they all speak English. So it can just be a really authentic kind of local experiences. And I think that's what anyone tries to have on their holidays these days.
Tell us a little bit about some of the people that you did meet along the trail. I think you said there's Germans, a lot of Germans, because they're always big hikers anyway.
Yes, the other walkers. So you got to be ready to meet a lot of Germans because that is mainly who dominates the trail, which also tells you that it's a pretty new trail because the Germans are always first to find these things, it seems like. So yeah, I mean, you'll also meet some Norwegians, not many, some Swedes, a few French, but really, as far as like Americans, very few and far between. Oh, you also find some Brits. It's close and easy for them. But I think at the end, at the Pilgrim Center at the end behind the cathedral where you go check in and you get your paperwork, they have a big map at the end and they have little pins in of, where people are from who have finished it. Those 1,000 people, right? And at the time when I was there for the year of 2018 in July, so it had been a couple, about halfway through the season, there were 4 pins in America and that was it. So I said it made me so happy because there are just, it's rare to find just such great things like this that haven't been discovered really yet. So it's exciting.
And then tell us about the end town. Say the name of that town again where the cathedral is and what kinds of things you'll see there. And should we spend extra time there or just give us a little detail on that?
Yeah, definitely. Trondheim is the end town. I don't know off the top of my head. I don't know how big it is, but it's one of probably the top 5, biggest cities in Norway or something like that. It's not huge at all, but it is beautiful. So that is, as I said, most of the Skudsbrandalen path takes you right through the center of the country. But what you're doing is kind of angling over to the coast. So by the time you get to Trondheim is actually on the water. So you get that beautiful water views. The town is lovely. They've got a really pretty river that runs through it that we did some fishing because I did stay an extra day, did some fishing, did some more kind of walking around the town and learning about the history. It's really up and coming, but it's small and manageable. You can also get out on boats and get into kind of that fjord system a little bit. They've got a bunch of islands around there that you can go visit. You can kayak. I mean, you can continue the adventures. Certainly, it would be easy.
Right. And for those that like the water and also some of these other paths, other than the one you did, one goes coast to coast so that you go through Sweden and into Norway. And I think 2 other ones, 1 or 2 of them also started in Sweden and ended over in Norway. So you get to do 2 countries, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. And that's kind of the second most popular path. I think it's called St. Olav's Path.
Yeah. St. Olav's Path is the coast to coast.
Yes, that's actually the second most popular path, and it's called St. Olav's Path, and it moves from Sweden into Norway. And that one is really interesting because, one, you get to do a couple countries that way, which is always fun, but you actually are really kind of following this history of St. Olav. And as you walk any of these paths, you're going to learn more and more and more about St. Olav and the history there. But that path in particular takes you through where he died, actually, which was in something called the Battle of Stiklestad. I'm probably not pronouncing that exactly right, but that's where he died. And that was where the history says that there were all these miracles that happened in that battle. And that was one of the things that led to him being canonized as a saint. It's a very special place for all of Scandinavia because, as I said, St. Olav is not only a big historical figure, an important figure for Norway, but really all of Scandinavia.
The 5-second recap of who this man is he was a king, correct?
Well, he was just a regular person in the beginning, but he started as a Viking, as a young boy on a ship, and he was a Viking. And then I believe he, got enough people behind him that he became king. He actually united Norway in many ways, and he introduced Christianity to the entire country. He was also a great traveler. As I recall, he also spent a bunch of time over in Russia and other areas, but Norway really was his home. Cool.
So you do, I'm sure they have markers and informative plaques or something along the ways to kind of give you a little feel for the history.
Yes, definitely.
Cool. Very nice.
We even, along the way, much like the Camino, there are a number of churches and cathedrals and stuff that you can go to along the way that are beautiful. Like we went to some that were all wood. We went to one that was all encased in glass. Some really beautiful, beautiful sites that have a lot of history behind them too. So, and you'll certainly learn more and more about even just Christianity and how it was introduced and, the goods and bads and all of that stuff. It's really fascinating.
Cool. And we're talking like he died in 1030. So we're talking ages and ages ago. And I guess there was a king in the 1120s who wanted this pilgrimage route to be established. So he encouraged the farmers and all that to start doing some shelter. So these paths have been walked in a pilgrimage way for centuries.
Yes.
Very cool.
Definitely. The king, who did make sure that there were a bunch of pilgrim shelters built way back when, that is a part of the Gudbrandsdalen path. And you'll kind of see shared markers. Sometimes you'll see the regular St. Olav Way markers. And then there's also something called the King's Way. And I think that's it's a little shorter. Obviously, it's not the whole pilgrimage, but you will see things that reference also called the King's Way that is a part of that Gudbrandsdalen path.
Cool. There was also an interesting tradition that you folks did when you came to a cairn. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, yeah. Much like, once again, like the Camino, it was this idea that the cairns are the piles of rocks at the top. And this happened to be at the top of the high pass, the Dover Pass. And of course, the idea is you put your own rock onto the pile, add to it, and you're leaving your burdens behind. So it's kind of a cleansing kind of ritual, I suppose, in a way. So it's really fun. Also, they had a ritual when you get to the cathedral in Trondheim. You are supposed to, that's where they have, mile marker 0. And you are supposed to walk around the cathedral 3 times before going in. I'm not really sure why exactly, but that is the tradition. And then you can go into the cathedral and go as far back as you can to see where they believe St. Olav is buried in the cathedral. The cathedral itself is also beautiful. That's a great stop in Trondheim. And you can do some really cool crypt tours where you go underneath it. It is crazy. It's really fascinating.
What are some of your favorite memories or stories from your trip?
For me, the thing that is the most special about it is the fact that it's relatively unknown yet. To me, travel is about exploring. And I have to feel like I am exploring and discovering things. And this was one of these times. Every time I put on my boots and I got out there and started walking, that's what it was like. I have some special memories, I suppose, of going over the high pass, the Dover Pass, and leaving a rock on the cairn, because it was a rough weather day that day. But, when you get done, you feel so good. The other thing that I think was really special that sticks with me is there happened to be one particular farmhouse that we stayed at that had a really old pilgrim barn where pilgrims used to stay. I think it was one of the oldest. It was along that King's Way path too. And the family was so lovely. It was still a working farm, but they served a whole dinner that was lovely. And everything from the dinner was from their farm. Everything. From the berries that they brought in to they even had a fish pond. So we had fish, we had lamb, and it was just really special to know that absolutely everything came from them. Even their wine, they made their own wine and beers. And it was just a really special night. And then we all kind of sat around and had this berry cake at the end of the night in their house. And they had, I think it was one of their sons play violin for us. It was just a beautiful situation that makes you love travel. I mean, those are the reasons why I love to travel. It's that kind of stuff.
Definitely. What a great experience. What do you wish you'd known before you'd gone?
I didn't know a lot about it before I went. So there's a lot of things, I think. But I think the big thing to keep in mind is that this, even though it is of similar vein to the Camino de Santiago, it is a harder hiking trail. So this is one where I feel like training is necessary if you're going to do the whole thing. If you're just going to go and do, a week or 3 days, you're probably going to be okay. But when you're putting out 15 to 17 miles a day, every day on these kinds of trails, it takes a toll on your feet and stuff like that. So training, I think, would be necessary. That's one of the things I would say. For me, it happened to be a very hot summer for most of Europe and especially Norway. So that one really took me by surprise. I was not expecting it to be that hot, but it was up in the 80s many days when we were walking, and I found it to be quite hard because of that. I think that was unusual though, but check the weather before you go, and you're going to need to, of course, pack in layers, but really know that it's Norway, but it can actually get hot. So that's an important thing to know too. So be prepared.
Yeah, I always tell people to be prepared for all 4 seasons, particularly when you're getting up that far north.
Yep.
All 4 seasons in one day.
Yep, definitely. Yes, we had that actually. It was crazy.
I know. That was like Scotland too. It'd be beautiful, freezing, beautiful, hot, rainy, everything. So you just have to have all, like you said, all the different layers so you are prepared for whatever the weather throws at you.
Yes, definitely.
I'll put a link to my recommended packing list in the show notes for this episode. Now, you are a huge traveler, obviously, because you've been nomadic for a while. How does this trip rate compared to some of the other trips that you've taken?
If I rate it against other kind of like hiking oriented trips, wow, I'd have to say it's probably in the top 3. I would put it, I was going to say, I would put it ahead of the Camino de Santiago, mainly because like I said, I really love the newness of it. But I think you've also done something on the Annapurna circuit. That has a lot of special memories for me too, of course. But this definitely is in probably the top 3 of kind of these like longer distance hikes or multi-day hiking trips that I've done.
Very cool. And so why don't you tell us a little bit about your blog and what you've got going on, and if people want to follow you, how they can reach out to you and your favorite social mediums and stuff like that. And just give us a overview of Sherry Ott.
Oh boy. Yes. So my blog is ottsworld.com. I've had it since 2006. So there are thousands of articles out there. And I've probably, I lost count actually. I think I've been to around 70 or so countries. I've been to all continents. So there's a lot of information out there. And I try to mix, informative information on how-tos and stuff like that with narrative stories the best that I can. You can also find me on social media. I'm very active on social media, especially when I travel. I'm doing live updates all the time, especially on Instagram stories. So do keep that in mind. If you really want to see what a hike is like, follow me when I'm on one of these hikes, because I will be doing updates from the road or from the trail every day. And I try to answer everyone's questions as I go. So Instagram, I'm at Otts World, and Facebook, I am at Otts World Travel.
And that's all OTT, folks. That's OTT.
OTTS World. And as far as what I have coming up, wow, talk about adventure. I have a lot of adventure coming up and I'm so excited. I'm just working on my 2019 plans, but I am going to be doing some surfing, a beginner surf camp in Panama, a little cruise, an adventure cruise in Panama and Costa Rica. I'm going to be doing some big hiking in Japan this year on one of their pilgrimage trails. So stay tuned for that.
Ooh, I want to get you back on about that. That's high on my list.
Because I do like to try to do these all over the world to give people alternatives to the Camino. So this is definitely one of these. It's called the Kumano Kodo, and I'll be doing that in kind of May and June. It's not nearly as long. I'll be doing a portion, but it should be really interesting. It looks quite challenging. And I did this already, but I haven't written about it yet. But another really cool one, I think, to keep your eye on is the Maine hut-to-hut system. And I traveled to Maine in the fall, which was beautiful. And they have this incredible hut-to-hut system. It's 4 huts. You can easily hike between the huts. It's beautiful hiking. I was, like I said, there in the autumn. The colors were incredible. The huts are more like eco lodges, and it is such a cool experience in Maine.
Which trail was that?
It's not actually a trail. It's called the Maine Huts and Trail Association. It's a nonprofit group that started this and have built the trails and the huts. And it is phenomenal. It's kind of like that standard of European hiking in a way, things, but in the States. So I personally think we're going to be seeing more and more of this all the time. I mean, Colorado has a hut-to-hut system, but it's not nearly this developed, nice, I should say. You don't have to pack in food. They've got luggage transfer. It is really ideal. So I'll be writing about that in detail in February, but definitely something to check out for the people who like to do multi-day hikes out there.
Oh, cool. Cool.
Yeah. So that's some of the stuff I have coming up. Some more Colorado stuff too, of course, hiking, some South Africa stuff, some Morocco stuff. I'm always on the move.
Thanks for coming on the program. I want to have you come back after your Japan trip. That sounds really cool.
Yes, I would be happy to. Thank you for having me.
It's been great having Sherry in the program. I especially like learning about a new trail system that takes us away from the crowds. Over-tourism, as I mentioned at the beginning of the program, is becoming a real problem. And this episode, we cover an area that only 1,000 people a year are doing at the time of this recording, which is amazing for a hugely popular, highly visited country. And Norway, as most Scandinavian countries, is fairly expensive, this would also be a little bit easier on your budget and be a great way to get up close and personal at seeing the stunning landscape that attracts so many people each year. And long-distance trails like this St. Olav's Way in Norway, or the El Camino, which is episode number 6, the Kungsleden in Sweden, number 5, or Annapurna in Nepal, episode number 28, they are grand, they are beautiful, but they are not just fun. They're a lot of work, and it's not something you just show up and do. These are something you must train for. In fact, in a soon-to-be-released show, I've got a training expert on the program that'll help guide us on what we should be doing to prepare for these trips. But also remember, nothing says you have to do the entire trail. You can always just do a portion, or perhaps do sections each year if you want to do the whole thing, but just don't want to tackle it all at one time. These hikes don't have to be just for pilgrimage reasons, for religious reasons, but they're also a great way to just clear your head out and think and perhaps work through some things that you just don't have time in the everyday life to just take time to think, because we're getting bombarded by so many things throughout the course of the day. So whatever your motivation for doing these long distance hikes, be sure you train. If you need the training information before that episode's out, be sure to write me at kit@activetraveladventures.com and I can send you some information. In fact, write me anyway. Again, kit@activetraveladventures.com. I love to hear from you. I like to know where you're going. If this show has inspired you in any way, I particularly would like to hear from you. And if you wouldn't mind, put your phone number in there and I'll give you a call. I'd like to hear how and what I can do to make this show better. I'm thinking about also maybe featuring just little snippets too of my conversations at the end of the program. So if you're open for it, send me an email and let's talk. Be sure to put in your time zone so I know what time would be a good time to call you. And as always, if you're interested in more information on St. Olav's Way, you can find it in the show notes on either your Apple or Google Podcast app or Spotify or iHeartRadio, whatever app you're listening to this on. It should, if you scroll down, it should be down there. Otherwise, you can also go to the website, activetraveladventures.com/Norway or /40 for episode 40. And if you forget, just go to the directory page, scroll through the previous episodes, or just use the search bar. And if you want to get the travel planners automatically, I send out a once a month newsletter. So I don't spam you, I don't sell your emails or anything like that. It's just me sitting in my home office. I send out the newsletter with the travel planners and whatever downloads that are available for whatever we covered in the month before. Usually it comes out the first week of the month. Anyway, so I hope you enjoyed today's program on St. Olav's Way in Norway. I'll be back in 2 weeks with another great adventure. Until then, this is Kit Parks. Adventure on.